Miami's season has been much more chaotic than imaginable, so to help us make sense of what's happening with Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, and Tyler Herro, we're joined by Rohan Nadkarni for a special bonus episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat. Whether you're tuning in on YouTube or your favorite podcast app, thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. I'm Wes Goldberg here with David Ramil. We are joined today by Rohan Nadkarni from NBC News to help us take a look at this Jimmy Butler situation from a different angle. Just so our audience knows, Rohan, you have a bit of a relationship with Jimmy Butler. You've covered him for a number of years, written stories about him for Sports Illustrated and for GQ.
But before we get into all that, you know, what is the budget for Miami Heat podcast intros? It's like, I don't know if, you know, whether it's the other ones in the market. I don't know if I'm allowed to say their names on here or not. We all know what they are. David's saying no, but
Dan Le Batard show, etc.
Yeah, exactly. It just feels like all you guys, I don't know if you're like, this is the reason you guys are skipping out on healthcare, but it just feels like there's a lot of effort put behind the production value of just the intro music here.
It's a network brand.
Every time it throws me off.
I see. Got it. That's right.
Got it. Okay.
We're just part of a broad network to bring you coverage of your favorite team every day. And
okay. You know, I had to, as a consumer, I just had to bring it out. You know, I'm not just a guest, I'm a listener, you know, so I had to get that off my chest.
We have a soundboard here. We have all the accoutrements, things that we need to provide the best information possible, Rohan. So listen, like I said, you've written about the guy. Mm-hmm. You spent time with him at the Miami Grand Prix. You've been to Big Face Coffee.
That's true. Yeah.
I do. Going back to the Miami Grand Prix, we could just start there. That's where Jimmy Butler made that comment about it would have been different if he were out there against the Celtics or the Knicks. And of course, that ended up being the comment that Pat Riley was asked about during his press conference. And he, you know, the quote that will ring throughout Miami Heat history that he should keep his mouth shut. There's been a lot of talk about blame and how all of this has went down. What are your thoughts on how this has gone down?
I just think this goes back to the summer more than anything else, because I think if the Heat's plan was to never extend Jimmy, which I think that seems like their plan. I think their plan has been to not extend Jimmy Butler, and we can debate the merits of that. I think eventually we'll talk about, you know, kind of where the Heat go from here. And I think when we talk about that, I'll kind of give my case why I was pro extension. And again, you can argue whether or not that is a smart contract, a good contract. But this really all starts with the extension, right? And I think obviously from Jimmy Butler's perspective, he felt like he earned that extension. You look at some of his peers in his age group, whether it is Kawhi or Paul George or even Kevin Durant, these are all guys now playing later into their 30s who've kind of gotten the contract that he's seeking from the Miami Heat. And I think, you know, there's a lot of talk, and we're all tweeting at each other about it. We all kind of clearly have our personal feelings, and I think it's obvious where we all stand. To me, even if you want to take blame out of it, the genesis of all what's happening right now is what happened in the summer when the Heat decided they both were not going to extend Jimmy Butler and not going to trade Jimmy Butler. Now, Wes, you and I talked about this for a long time. Like last time we spoke on this podcast, we kind of had a chat before and after, like what's led to this situation. To me, if the Heat didn't want to extend Jimmy Butler, the idea of bringing him here, you know, and having him play out this season was a bad idea for multiple reasons. One, because of what's happening now. That was a risk, right? He was going to get fed up. He's going to realize, like, I'm 35 years old. I have a finite amount of basketball time left. Why am I wasting a year, even if you take the money out of it? But beyond that, for the Heat, why are you wasting another year? Why are the Heat wasting another year with this build, even with kind of what they've gotten? They've gotten what they've hoped for in Tyler Herro, right? This is the Tyler Herro they've been waiting on for 3 years. Even with that, this team is mid. It's like the definition of mid. It's an average team. Wes and I, we talk about this all the time. Like, they're going to beat a good team like once every 3 weeks. They're going to lose to a bad team once every 3 weeks. Like, this is who they've been for 3 seasons now. What was the plan? What was the plan other than you're honestly wasting everyone's time for another year by doing what they did with Jim?
I know I agree. David, I'm curious because I know you were optimistic about this team kind of going into the season. I thought, in hindsight, I suppose
I'm still every now and then I'm having a normal day, and then I remember that David said the Heat would have beat the Celtics last year.
Damn right.
In the first time, and it just derailed.
I still believe it.
Keep your mouth shut, David. Yeah. If you're not going to be out there playing.
No. I'm saying had they been healthy, I still think they would have had a chance. Certainly much more competitive than what it was. But I don't know. Like you're making it sound like a plan has to be one that's a clearly defined vision of what this team is capable of doing for the next 5 years. And I get that prospect, but so much of what the Heat have been able to accomplish over the last 5 years feels like it's kind of all up in the air, and it's been, I think, wildly successful. And some would argue, as they have, that it's the second most successful era in Heat history in terms of their ability to do finals and stuff like that. So third, because they didn't get a title out of it.
Yeah, I mean the Shaq, Dwayne, the big three, those two are
ahead. I would. This is a controversial. No one wants to hear this because everyone's focused on championships. I think this is a better era of Heat basketball than.
I agree,
and especially because that Shaq thing was. Look at the 21st century champions. Like that one really sticks out like a sore thumb
as the best.
Just an alternate, exactly. Just a complete group of mercenaries that had like a few months of great basketball and then were never heard from.
All right, fair enough. Okay, so 2 or 3, but to your point, David, go ahead. Sorry,
no. So given that, it feels like that didn't require a plan. I feel like I've said this many times before, and I stick by it. 2019 was such a fluke. They were much better, much more quickly than they expected to. And the plan kind of went ass over tea kettle as a result because they just didn't know what to do next. Like they were thinking it was going to be a slower rebuild. They didn't expect Jimmy to be great in his first season. I think they didn't expect Bam to be as good as he was in his first season as a full-time starter, nor did they expect Tyler to be the kind of player he wound up being. And so they wound up achieving much more success, much more quickly than imaginable. And so there was no plan. They were kind of just flying by their seat of the pants every season throughout all this, throughout the whole Jimmy era. And as such, I don't see why you wouldn't continue that because, as I just said, it was the second most successful era.
Well, can we drill? Let's drill down in that because I've heard you say that before. So the difference being then, okay, so if Jimmy Butler, he's the star that you acquire in 2019, and then like you said, Bam was better than they expected. Tyler Herro was better than they expected. Had they not been that good, would they have been? Is the idea then that they would have been easier to trade to get that other co-star for Jimmy Butler? Like why did it go a little haywire after that?
Because I think they were all looking at trying to acquire that next star because they didn't think they had it on the roster. They didn't think Bam was going to be that star. I think at least I don't think so. At least that's my perception of it, is that they didn't expect him to have.
So then it would have been easier. Potential. And then he became that star, so they couldn't trade him.
As far as the approach to team building would have been different, more along the lines of what you're discussing in terms of a plan. And so I don't think there has been. I think they just were like really good in one season. And then, of course, things went very different also with COVID and the shortened season and the limited amount of recovery time from the Orlando bubble to the following season. And it kind of just, it's changed the timetable for how they were thinking in terms of a team building approach. And so it's never quite worked out that way. And again, sometimes you're just successful, and they've had so much success that it's worked out. And they keep thinking, remember, it almost feels like every year they kind of change the approach in terms of, well, this is our last year that we're going to kind of review this team. And then the injuries happen. It's like, well, let's give it one more year. And then, you kind of just, you're resetting constantly because you're never quite sure where you are in terms of within the context of the rest of the league. And I still think, I still think the front office believes that this team, for better or for worse, and maybe it's myopic, maybe they're just flat out wrong, they still think that this group can beat anybody. And if they're fully healthy with a fully satisfied and engaged Jimmy Butler, that there's still a team that can beat anybody in the Eastern Conference and contend for a title.
Ron, what is all that stuff that made it easier to build around Jimmy Butler?
This is my frustration, is like now they're just like victims of their own success, right? Because you could argue, like, you look at the Bucks. The Bucks traded one of the best players from their championship team in Drew Holiday in an effort to be more aggressive in building around Giannis Antetokounmpo. Like, The Knicks probably did not expect Jalen Brunson. Nobody in the NBA expected Jalen Brunson to be the kind of player he is, an A1 star. And look at how quickly they've pivoted to building a team around him.
Yep, they traded RJ Barrett. They traded guys. They traded. They traded
guys.
But what happened before then? What happened before then, though, that led them to that point? Not in terms of Milwaukee. That was different. They included Drew Holiday. That was something that Portland and Joe Cronin were willing to accept in terms of wanting to trade Lillard.
Right.
But from New York, what happened before that? A lot of crappy years that allowed them to build a treasure trove of draft picks that allowed them to acquire the rest of the players.
Miami not have those crappy years? I mean, I know we adore the 7-11 years.
They won one playoff series.
Yeah.
Okay, not crappy enough to build again.
They didn't build. The Knicks didn't use draft picks to get those players.
They signed Jalen Brunson through free agency.
They didn't. No, their picks were the Mikal Bridges.
Randall
that was it.
DiVincenzo.
Yep.
Even Anunoby was a guy they traded Barrett
2 players.
Not Barrett. Yeah, Barrett and
Quickly, who they drafted. They're all fair.
Right. So even the Celtics traded Marcus Smart, like a fan favorite. It's like these teams took swings when they needed to take swings with valuable members of their championship core. Even Grant Williams, I know it's like a funny guy, was an important part of a team that made the NBA Finals, and they were kind of willing to part ways with him because they were doing all this wheeling and dealing. Like, you have to be an aggressive. You have that is the hallmark of a good front office. I agree. Maybe the Heat were caught off guard a little bit by the 2020 team making the finals, but the hallmark of a great, not just good, a great front office is adapting to that quickly. Look at the Dallas Mavericks, who made the conference finals in 2022. The next year, they were like, wait, this is not working. They made moves. They went out and got Kyrie and PJ Washington because they were like, they pivoted quickly off a team that made the conference finals because they realized it wasn't good enough. I think the Heat have 2 eras within this Jimmy one. There's 19 to 22. And I think the first one ended at the end of the 2022 season when they had Kyle and they had PJ for its lone year. I think the 2022 team was the best Heat team we've seen out of this entire build. From there, it's been different. We're now in the 3rd straight regular season of this team being average. And yes, it's like the 2023 run. It's like people just throw it back in your face as like, see, this team can beat anybody. To me, the strategy cannot be overachieving. The strategy cannot be building a team that's average in the regular season and say, but don't let us get in the tournament. Right. That's not how this league works historically. There's a reason why that run was so special. It is a once-in-a-generation kind of run, and it just keeps being thrown back in the face of anyone who argues that this team hasn't done a good job the last year.
The way that I've put it this entire time.
Can I make a quick counterpoint? Counterpoint? The point, I think, the argument there is, well, they tried to do that. The same moves that you just talked about in terms of what Milwaukee did and what New York did was acquiring PJ Tucker, a champion who was the perfect floor spacing power forward, et cetera, that they had in Jay Crowder 2 seasons prior, and getting Kyle Lowry. And the Lowry thing blew up a lot more quickly than they expected to. He fell flat.
I agree, but they still had 2 years of great Lowry playoff play. He was in 2023, he was on one of their best lineups. I'd argue their 2023 playoff lineup of Lowry, Martin, Jimmy, Bam, and Duncan's the best lineup they've had in the last 5 years, you could argue. And Lowry was a huge part of that. Like, Lowry, for all his faults, is the kind of guard you need in this backcourt. He can guard up. He was guarding Jaylen Brown in the 2023 conference finals. Like, I think he was a huge part for 2 seasons. I agree his 3rd year got really bad, but to me was one of the best moves.
And everybody saw that coming. They did anticipate that. Everybody knew that last year of the Kyle Lowry contract was not going to age well, but they've got him for those first couple of years.
But they made the moves.
And it worked.
To your point. But
it wasn't enough.
It wasn't enough.
It wasn't enough. I mean, look at what Boston has done. I mean, they've gone out and reinvented the roster multiple times since making the finals in 2022. The Knicks have gone out and gotten 3 guys that would be the 3rd best player on the Heat.
Those are the 2 eras, right? Like the 2022 thing ends, and you have to give credit. And I know this stuff is hard to anticipate, and we thought, but they didn't expect this, they didn't expect that. The role of a great front office is to expect these things.
Yes.
It's like fans aren't supposed to expect these things. It's the job of a front office to be cold, calculated, and sober enough to look at this and just be like, Kyle Lowry's 37 years old. This ain't gonna age well.
If you go back to February 2022,
they made the finals the following year. Like, I don't understand what the point is. If the 22 is the end of an era, the following year they made the finals. Like, how do you argue that they've been?
Because I don't think you can recreate what happened in 2023.
Right.
I don't think you can recreate what happened in 2023, which is make.
But they did it. the following summer they tried to get Dame Lillard and didn't.
But
they haven't. It's not they haven't tried.
I get it, but people are focused on Dame. When if you look at 2022, the role players who've been traded since then, the Derek Whites, the Holidays, the Porzingis, Anunoby, Siakam, PJ Washington. You can go.
That's the part that I want to talk about next year.
The players that they needed. It's not just stars.
I agree.
I agree. This team over and over again, and the way that I've put it, and essentially what Rohan is trying to say, it is not a strategy to play above expectations. You should just be good. You should be expected to be good and then also be good. That just tends to be a better strategy. That's how you win championships.
The Warriors won 73 games and signed Kevin Durant. You know what I mean? It's like
you can still get better.
Yeah.
My whole thing with the Heat, not just with the regular season and their playoff performance, also they acquired Jimmy Butler for essentially nothing, right? They traded Whiteside, Richardson, and a protected
He was a
first.
free agent signing, effectively. He was a free agent signing.
But it cost them very little to do that outside of to create the cap space and all these things.
Yeah.
And they tried to lowball Portland for Damian Lillard. They tried to lowball, for Kevin Durant, perhaps. This team over and over again, whether it comes with offseason moves, player acquisitions, star player acquisitions, or success during the season, have tried over and over to make the exception the rule. And that's just not how it works. You count your lucky stars if you sign Jalen Brunson or if you sign a Jimmy Butler and they blossom into a top 10 player, and they say, okay, this is amazing. What can we do? You kneel down and put your hands together if you have a run like you do in 2023 and be like, that was amazing. Let's make sure we never have to do that again. Let's build on it.
Right.
And so
I will say that the trade deadline of the 22-23 season was a pivotal point where, to me, that's where they absolutely blew it the most. That was their point where they said, you know what, maybe we're not a great team, but we're good enough and we believe in everything that we have on this roster, but we can still make a significant change. Because again, the following summer, maybe they could have gotten Dame. Who knows what would have happened. And then I asked Pat Riley, and you were there, Wes, when we were at the end of season press conference. I was like, why didn't you make a move at the trade deadline that might have shored up the rotation so that you weren't starting freaking Caleb Martin at power forward? That's basically what it boiled down to. Maybe it wouldn't have made a difference against Denver in the finals, but to me, that was a pivotal moment where they could have improved their roster, and that might have been enough to kind of put them over their edge. To your point, Rohan, about getting a better role player that might have helped the core of that team so that they could have achieved a championship.
And even 2023, it's like, there's always talk about Jimmy's availability. Like, Jimmy Butler was second team All NBA and played 64 games in 2023. And they were still in the plan. And I don't know what more you could reasonably expect for a mid-30s star who is not a shooter. Like, you compare him to guys in his age class, KD, Steph, Paul George, Kawhi. These guys all miss a lot of games, and they play a much less. Kawhi, I think, is the exception, even though he's turned into a great shooter. Like, Jimmy Butler's style also lends himself to aging the way he is aging. And we can talk about, does he take an extra game off here or there? Is he less interested in whatever the case may be. Like, I just think that they were not realistic about this team for the last 3 years, and they got bailed out by that finals run, which was largely engineered by the guy they don't want on the team anymore.
Yeah. All right, we're going to spin this forward. They have to do something about Jimmy Butler. His 7-game suspension runs out in the middle of this month. There seems to be no traction on a trade for Jimmy Butler. We'll talk about what they could do, where they could move him, what they should be looking for in return. And then we're going to play out the next 2 years for the Miami Heat. We're going to do that coming up next year on Locked On Heat. Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Here with Rohan Nadkarni from NBC News. David Ramil, Wes Goldberg here. All right. The latest on Jimmy Butler is that obviously he's still suspended. The Miami Heat are actively looking for trades. The Phoenix Suns are the team that's most motivated to acquire Jimmy. And Jimmy Butler is telling teams like the Memphis Grizzlies, I'm not going to play there. Don't trade for me. Rohan, what do you think the Heat can do at this point?
So first of all, I will say the Memphis thing, I'm not entirely sure if it's like Jimmy's going to not report. I think it's more like this happens all the time. It's like when Rich Paul said Anthony Davis is entering free agency no matter what. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
I think this is a lot. This is not like I think he's only going to show up in one place if he gets traded there. I think it's, hey, like, am I going to re-sign here? Probably not. So it's like that kind of tells them whether or not they're going to give up the assets. Or it might even be, Memphis has told him we're not going to give you the extension.
Would you, if you were Memphis, would you trade for him, understanding that you could probably lose him in the summer? Like, it's been compared to Kawhi Leonard, mercenary style, make a run for it.
If I'm Memphis, I think I would, because first of all, I think he'd be great on that team. I think he'd fit right in. I think you're looking at harder to find a better foursome than John Morant, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Jimmy Butler. I think their styles all fit together incredibly well, and that would be a really, really good team. You throw Marcus Smart into that mix. I know he's kind of had some injury issues the last couple of years. Like, that to me is an incredibly enticing closing five if you're Memphis. So, and because if I'm Memphis, because I'm paying my top three guys so much money, I'd rather go all in with Jimmy, continue to lock up those three guys, and retool the team around them in the foreseeable future. So I understand why Memphis would do it. I understand why Jimmy would be like, I'm not resigning here, or he doesn't feel confident that he get an extension. But if I'm Memphis, I think it's worth the swing, because I don't think Jimmy Butler's not going to show up there. First of all, I think we're looking at Jimmy Butler's probably going to play another game for the Miami Heat. If I had to guess right now, as of today, we're recording this on Thursday evening, January 9th. My guess right now is he will play another game for the Miami Heat because of what the trade offers are like, as crazy as that sounds. I think Phoenix is searching high and low for a team to take Bradley Beal. Whatever favors their front office can call in, they're going to try to do. I also think it's in the Heat's best interest, and frankly, possibly Jimmy's, to see what happens with the Warriors closer to deadline. I know the Warriors say they're not interested. I know they say they're looking for a big man. I think if Steph and Draymond continue to kind of grumble a little bit, and I wouldn't say they've been publicly criticizing the front office, but I think you're starting to see some exasperation from them on where this is headed. I think you have to wait to see if they'll get involved. And frankly, it's very funny, the parallels to the Dame situation, and we don't have to get into all that, but I do think a lot of people are maybe rightfully taking a victory lap on the Miami Heat media and their fans in terms of how this situation is played out and the way people feel about Jimmy compared to Dame. But if you're the Heat, I think you kind of have to wait closer to the deadline and see if a team gets desperate, a better offer materializes, a team feels like they can take the chance. And I think if you're Jimmy, I think he probably has an assurance that Phoenix is the most likely to re-sign him, but I don't think that means no other team would.
So let's play this out, because if you're the Heat, you're looking for a couple of helpful players back. You're very motivated to make the playoffs. You don't want these picks to OKC and Charlotte to come unprotected over these next few years. You're looking for a couple players back. Let's say you find that third team. Beal goes to that third team. Jimmy goes to Phoenix, gets his wish, and then Miami gets a couple role players. Maybe there's a draft pick involved. Maybe not. I don't know. How do you play the rest of this out? Because now you're looking at a team built around Bam, who struggled this year. Tyler Herro, who's having a all-star caliber type season right now. Good young players that we like. Jaime, Nikola Jovic, Kel'el Ware. There's some good stuff there. Eric Spoelstra is still the head coach. Like, what do you do next? Because as much as you like some of that stuff, you're still short of the things that you need to go ahead and win a championship.
Right. And this is where it becomes interesting, because first of all, I think the Heat have to make the playoffs this year at all costs. You don't want to go into 2026 owing OKC, an unprotected pick. If you make the playoffs this year, it guarantees that the OKC pick is in the back half of the draft, the first round. And now you get more flexibility to trade your first round picks moving forward. So that becomes really important. And the second thing is, the irony of all this is, once the Heat trade Jimmy, their entire goal now becomes, how do we find another Jimmy Butler? How do we find another guy? Because, as much as people want to tell me we love Jovic, the comps come in every day. Now he's Dirk Nowitzki this week. Like the next week he's, Magic Johnson because he's handling the ball. I don't know. Whatever the case may be. None of what they have works right now without a superstar to revolve around. And I think that goes for Herro. I think that goes for Bam. That goes for the young guys. If I'm the Heat, I'm if we really play this out, Wes, someone mentioned this to me the other day. Let's say their plan is to go cap space forward in 2026. Tyler Hero's due for an extension. Are you going to pay Tyler Hero's next contract, even as great as he's been? Like, there are a lot of questions that come up now because of this kind of search for the next star and flexibility and what's the right move. Like, if I'm the Heat, I think my plan would be I'm trading everyone except Bam to try to get as many picks and cap space as possible for 2026. Because the picks give me flexibility to trade, the cap space gives me flexibility to sign. You're eating, 2 years. Unfortunately, I think you'll have competitive teams because they're always competitive teams. But to me, I think that's their best path forward.
So if you do it that way, and I'm assuming you mean, okay, you move Jimmy presumably before the deadline, and then you kind of make those other moves in the summer that you're talking about.
Yeah, in the next couple of summers. Yeah.
Right. So in that case, would you just take Beal and eat the 2 years?
The problem
as long as you're getting that Phoenix pick.
It cuts into the 27.
Cuts into 2026. You're right.
That's where it gets dicey. Unless
he has a player option.
I imagine he's taking it.
Yeah, he's probably
unless you're confident you can move him. And that's why I think it's interesting they didn't extend Jimmy. Now, look, I get that they're frustrated, but the way I look at it is if you extended Jimmy, I think you'd have this year and next year as 2 solid windows to compete, provided you upgrade the roster. Like, if you extended Jimmy and went out and got like a Cam Johnson or someone like that, then I feel more confident about this team being better than what it's been. The one big move they made was Rozier, and that's just been so unfortunate.
Well, and they obviously decided that that's not good enough. And that was my point all along, is once you decided that you weren't extending Jimmy Butler, you should have traded him. That was it, point blank. There was no point in bringing him back this year. And I still would love to know, in an alternate universe, if Paul George decides to re-sign with the Clippers, if Jimmy Butler is playing for the Sixers right now. But that's the part that's we've done enough of the past stuff. Yeah. So, all right. So let's say you trade Jimmy, you get, let's call it, 1 future first from somewhere, a couple role players who come off the books within the next couple of years. You're talking about rebuilding around just Bam. So you didn't include Tyler Herro in that. If you would then explore, I suppose, trading. This has also been brought up to me by a couple of people, is if you're the Heat, why wouldn't you trade Tyler Herro now while his value is high? And I don't know what it would take to trade Tyler at this point. Like, I've made this point what if Oklahoma City called? Because I think he's sort of exactly what they need, is sort of a ball handler, floor spacer guy.
Yeah.
And offered, they have $1 million here's 4 first-round picks for Tyler Herro and Aaron Wiggins and another big contract. If you're Miami, like, how many first-round picks does it take for you to at least have a meeting about it? And
that's why it's tough. And I feel like I always pile on Tyler. I want to be clear. He's been incredible this season.
Yeah, I'm not
in every way they could possibly hope.
Just a thought exercise.
And going back to last year, I think he's handled everything that's been going on around him really well. But to me, if you're going to trade Jimmy and this all comes back to getting that next star, then I'm probably moving off Herro too. And that's not a shade to him, but it's just like the reason I keep Bam, like, proven playoff riser, as much as he struggled this year offensively, and we can talk about how much, the Tyler-centric offense maybe hurt someone like Bam. Bam, to me, is a proven playoff riser and has come through time and time again in big moments against the best competition, which I think he's the only player on the roster right now, excluding Jimmy, who's proven that time and time again over a course of many years. And that's why I think you move Tyler for picks, because then it makes you a player on multiple fronts in 2026, because now you become a free agent destination and a possible trade destination because of the picks. And I think ultimately that's more important than, because I think whatever star you're going to get, you're just going to run into the same issues with the Tyler fit than you kind of have now.
I think if you were confident that you could sign somebody outright in 2026, you probably keep Tyler. Because if you're able to, like, we're talking about Luka, De'Aaron Fox, Kevin Durant, like, all those guys could play with Tyler, no problem. David, what do you think? Like, if and when they trade Jimmy Butler, I suppose, like, what is it that what is the next step at that point? Is it somebody? I'll ask you point blank. Is it somebody like De'Aaron Fox?
I don't think he's the star that makes Miami a title contender.
Agreed.
I think
I agree with you.
He's a great player. I love watching him play when he's at his very best, and it's fun to watch. I don't know. I don't know if that star is going to become available. Like, there seems like there are very few singular stars that are good enough to carry a team to the next level. It's just, to me, I would rather keep Tyler on the roster and see if that's the core of your build, and then looking around at the other players that you have drafted, whether it's Ware or Nico or Jaime or anybody else on the roster, and see what you can do to shore them up, and then say, you know what, you've got 1 and 2 in place. But I don't know, because maybe that's not the right approach either, because I understand Rowan's point about wanting to keep at least Bam, and maybe Tyler's not that guy, but I don't know that you can just give away that kind of level of talent either. It might just be a flawed build in terms of you're never going to get your 1A player with either Bam or a Tyler on the roster, and so you might as well just concentrate on building all the other pieces. To me, I keep going back to what it was in the Orlando bubble, and again, maybe that was a bad comparison, but it was arguing whether or not Miami had a chance with the Lakers at that point in time. The argument was always, well, they've got LeBron and Anthony Davis, and those are 2 clearly better players than anybody on the Heat roster. And I would agree with that. We did get a transcendent Jimmy performance in those finals runs, but I think the difference in why Miami, in my opinion, had a chance there was that they had the better 2 through 7 in terms of
3 through 7,
what the talent disparity was.
Yeah.
And so that being the case,
I'll throw out KCP and Caruso. Let's not sleep on.
Well,
they rose up.
To your point, I think we've seen maybe with Boston last year, you don't have to have the best player on the court necessarily to win. Like Luka was the best player in the finals. Boston won the championship in 5 games. This year, you're seeing Cleveland, as great as Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, some of these guys are. I don't think anybody puts them in the top 10, right? And so maybe going forward in Adam Silver's version of the NBA now,
right? It's roster parity as well as league-wide parity too.
Exactly. Maybe it's okay. Let's just have a really good top 8 or 9 that could be actually versatile, not fake versatile the way the Heat are, but actually versatile and play in a lot of different ways.
I mean, I will say I do think Tatum is still a top 5 player at the end of the day. I know he's boring and people don't like him, but
to the point,
yes.
You don't need the best player on the court anymore to win the championship, right?
Right, but I think at the end of the day, you need a top 8 guy. You really want a top 8 guy. I think what Cleveland's doing is remarkable, and I love what's going on there. I think they have a great team, but it also is going to be. Is anyone picking Cleveland over the Celtics in a playoff series? I don't.
Yes,
I might.
I don't.
I
would.
I'm not at all surprising for this podcast.
I'm one of those people that's like, I'll believe it when I see it, and I love Cleveland. But I need to see them.
I can already see the comments of Rowan being a closeted. But
we saw them play in the playoffs last year. We saw them play in the playoffs last year.
Just move to Boston already.
I just think that they have to be hoping, praying that things go wrong with SGA, that things go wrong with Ant, that things go wrong with Luka, and hope that they can try to get one of these guys, because we know they're not going to play for the draft. They don't seem interested in trading a guy like Bam for the kind of haul that gets you the pick that turns into SGA. So if they're never gonna tank, which is their prerogative, and as a fan, I do appreciate that on some level. I like being able to watch the team every night and they're competitive. If they're hoping one of those situations goes wrong, then I think they need to be more proactive in building out their picks. And I think Bam, whether it's through the Olympics, the respect he has league-wide, is a guy players want to play with, which is why I'm more flexible on literally everyone else than him.
Last word here, Ron. What do you want to happen for the Heat? What would draw you back in? What would, in your mind, accomplish something that could kick off a parade down Biscayne Boulevard? Like, what do you want happening here in Miami?
Gosh, that's a great question. I just think that ship has sailed. I would have liked to see them just go all in around Jimmy and Bam one more time. To me, it's a bummer they weren't in on someone like Finney Smith or a Cam Johnson. Like, these are the kinds of role players I've been wanting them to get for years and years, and they just haven't been able to do it. And I just think the ship has sailed on them trying to go, address this roster more and more. And it's like, again, it's like the way people hype up the young guys on the team, I think they're fine, but they're not championship caliber role players. I want to see guys who've had playoff success playing off other stars before on this team.
Machine.
And I just think the ship has sailed. I think the ship has sailed. And at this point, I just want to see Jimmy Butler play for a good team again. And I want to see the Heat take seriously this idea about getting flexibility. Yes, I agree it's important for them to make the playoffs this year, but make sure you're really looking forward about what you need to kind of get involved to acquire the caliber of player they're going to need.
We could honestly have this conversation for another hour, and I think we would still start carving into things. There's a lot of meat left on this bone. Rohan, you and I text enough about this stuff, but I think there's so much to actually talk about here. But we have ran out of time. Thanks so much for jumping on here. We're going to have to do this again. Maybe when Jimmy Butler eventually does get traded, or maybe when there's another turn in the Jimmy Butler saga, we'll bring you back on. But that'll do it for us today. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcast app.